My mother passed away on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday I had found 3 things in her house that told me I had never known who she actually was. Tonight every single story is about a mother who kept a secret. Some of these secrets were kept out of shame. Some were kept out of love. And one of them, the last one tonight, was kept for a reason that will change how you think about everything you believe you know about your own mother. 5 mothers, 5 secrets, 5 families who thought they knew everything. Let me take you back to where each of these stories started. Story 1 begins. My name is Thomas. I am 44 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 16 months ago my mother passed away at 71 and left behind, in the drawer of her bedside table, 3 sealed envelopes. One was addressed to me. One was addressed to a name I did not recognize. One was addressed to a third name I also did not recognize. My mother's name was Eleanor. She had raised me as an only child. I had been an only child for 44 years. I held the 3 envelopes for a long time before I opened any of them. I opened mine first. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting that began by saying she loved me and ended by saying she was sorry, and that the middle of the letter contained the explanation for the other 2 envelopes. My mother had given birth 3 times. Once to me, twice before me. 2 children she had placed for adoption before she had met my father, in the years before the life she had built with us had existed, in circumstances she described in the letter as the circumstances of a young woman with no support and no path forward that she could see at the time. She had never told my father. She had never told me. She had carried the 2 names, the names the adoption agency had told her the families had chosen, for 40 years and had written them on envelopes in the last weeks of her life when she had understood that the carrying was going to end, and that the names deserved to go somewhere rather than nowhere. I found the other 2 recipients through a combination of the names on the envelopes and the information my mother had included in my letter about the adoption agency and the approximate years. It took 6 weeks. Both of them were alive. A woman named Carol, 47, living in Ohio. A man named James, 46, living in Colorado. Neither of them had known about the other. Neither of them had known about me. All 3 of us had been my mother's children without any of us knowing the others existed. The first phone call I made was to Carol. The conversation lasted 2 hours. The second call was to James. That conversation lasted 3. At the end of the second call, James said something I have thought about every day since. He said he had spent his whole life wondering if his biological mother had ever thought about him, and that an envelope addressed to him from a woman who had thought about him enough to write his name on it 40 years later was the most specific answer he had ever expected to receive. I said I thought she had thought about him every day. I believe that is true. I believe it because the envelope existed and because the letter she left me was written by someone who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time and who had needed, at the end, to put it down carefully rather than let it fall. Update. 4 months later, the 3 of us met in person last month. Not in any of our cities. We chose a city none of us lived in, which felt right, a neutral place that belonged to all of us equally. We spent 2 days together. We ate meals and walked around and talked about our mother and about our lives and about what it meant to be siblings who had never been in the same room before. Carol brought photographs of herself at various ages that she had been collecting since she found out, looking for resemblances. James brought a letter he had written to our mother that he had not sent anywhere, but had needed to write. I brought the 3 envelopes. We sat with all of it spread across a hotel room table, and I thought about a bedside drawer, and about a woman who had carried 3 names for 40 years, and about what it means to finally put something down, and about the 3 of us being in the same room for the first time because she had. The envelopes are in a frame now in my hallway, all 3 of them together, the way they were always supposed to be. Eleanor left 3 envelopes for 3 children who had never met. And just like Thomas found something in his mother's bedside drawer, the woman in story 2 also found something after her mother was gone. But what she found was not an envelope. It was a key to a safety deposit box that had been sitting in a bank downtown for 38 years. And what was inside that box had been waiting for exactly this long to be found. Wait, it gets stranger. Here is what was inside. My name is Diana. I am 42 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado. And 2 years ago my mother passed away at 74. And among the items in her estate was a small key on a plane carrying with a bank name stamped on it, and a box number that meant nothing to me until the estate attorney told me it corresponded to a safety deposit box at a branch downtown that had been maintained under my mother's name and paid annually for 38 years. My mother's name was Ruth. She had been, in every version of her I had known in 42 years, a retired schoolteacher who had grown up in a small town, married my father at 24, raised 3 children, and lived the specific quiet life of someone who had always been exactly where they were. The safety deposit box did not belong to that version of her. The box contained the following things: a passport issued in 1974 under my mother's maiden name, with stamps from 11 countries, most of them in South America and Southeast Asia. A bundle of letters in a language I did not speak, tied with ribbon, addressed to a name I did not recognize. A photograph, clearly from the early 1970s, of my mother, young, unmistakably her despite the 50-year distance, standing in what appeared to be a jungle clearing with 6 other people, all of them in practical clothing, all of them looking at the camera with the specific expression of people who are somewhere they have chosen to be at significant cost. A press credential from 1973 identifying my mother as a photojournalist for a publication I had never heard of. A small notebook filled with handwriting in multiple languages, some of which I recognized as my mother's and some of which was not. My mother had been a photojournalist. In the early 1970s, before she had met my father, before she had become the person I had known, she had traveled to 11 countries and documented things that the notebook, when I had parts of it translated, suggested were not simple travel photography, but something more deliberate and more dangerous. The press credential told me she had been working. The passport told me she had been moving. The photograph told me she had been with people who were committed to something. I spent 8 months trying to understand who my mother had been before she was my mother. I found 2 people from the photograph. One of them through a journalist's archive. One of them through a family member who had found me online after I had posted the photograph to a historical research group. Both of them confirmed that my mother had been, in the early 1970s, a working photojournalist who had covered political situations in several countries at significant personal risk, and who had, at some point in the mid-1970s, stopped entirely and disappeared from the circles she had been in. She had disappeared because she had met my father, and had chosen the quiet life. I do not know if she had missed the other life. I do not know if the safety deposit box was maintained because she could not let go of it, or because she wanted someone to find it eventually. What I know is that the woman in the photograph in the jungle clearing had a specific expression. Not afraid, not performing, but entirely present in a way I recognized immediately, because I had seen it on my mother's face in certain moments throughout my childhood, and had never known what it was connected to. I know now. I think about her every time I see that expression on my own face in a mirror. I think I have more of her than I knew. Update: 3 months later. The journalist's archive I found contained 3 photographs credited to my mother's maiden name. Published photographs from 1972 and 1973, in a now-defunct publication that had covered political movements in South America. I had the archive send me copies. When they arrived I sat with them for a long time. My mother had taken these photographs. Someone had published them. They had been in print for 50 years and none of us had known they existed. I framed one of them, a black and white image of a crowd in a street, the composition precise and full of the specific humanity that good photojournalism contains. It hangs in my hallway next to a photograph of my mother at 65, in her garden, in the quiet life she had chosen. I look at both of them every morning. I think about who she was before she was mine, and about what it means to love someone across the distance of everything you did not know about them. I think it means loving them more completely than you thought you were. I think that is the right thing to have learned from a key on a plane carrying. Ruth had been a photojournalist in 11 countries before she became a mother. And just like Diana found a key that opened a different version of her mother, the woman in story 3 also found a key. But this key did not open a safety deposit box. It opened a conversation that her mother had been trying to start for 30 years. And it happened in a hospital room at 3 in the morning when her mother believed nobody was listening. Can you imagine? Here is what she heard. My name is Rebecca. I am 39 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and 18 months ago I spent 3 nights in a hospital room with my mother, who had been admitted for a cardiac procedure and who on the second night began talking in her sleep at approximately 3 in the morning in a way that produced, over the course of about 20 minutes, the most significant information I had ever received about my own family. My mother's name is Margaret. She is 70 years old and she has always been a careful woman. Careful with words, careful with what she shared, careful in the way of someone who has spent a long time managing specific information. The talking happened because she was heavily medicated from the procedure, and because the medication had apparently lowered whatever guard she had been keeping for 30 years. I want to be honest that I did not record what she said because I did not know it was coming, and by the time I understood what I was hearing I was too still to reach for my phone. I listened. I wrote down what I could remember immediately after she stopped, in the Notes app on my phone, at 3:15 in the morning, in a hospital chair with my heart going very fast. What my mother said, in fragmented sentences across 20 minutes of medicated sleep, was enough to tell me that she had had a relationship before my father, a significant one, a long one, with a woman. Not a friendship, a relationship. She said a name several times. She said things that were specific and that were clearly the language of someone who had loved and been loved, and who had left that love for reasons she apparently still, 30 years later, was processing in her sleep in a hospital room while her daughter sat 3 feet away and wrote down everything she could catch. My mother has never told me she is gay or bisexual, or anything about this part of her history. I have not told her what I heard. I have been sitting with this information for 18 months deciding what to do with it. What I have decided is this. The information is hers. She has carried it for 30 years, and she has made decisions about what to do with it, and those decisions belong to her and not to me. What I have also decided is that I love my mother differently since that night. Not less, not with more complicated feelings, but more completely, because I have a piece of her that she has not shown anyone, and that arrived in a hospital room at 3 in the morning. And that tells me something about the interior life of a woman I have spent 39 years knowing, and that I have been knowing partially this whole time. I have done one thing with the information. I have, in the 18 months since, been more open in conversations with my mother about things that matter. More willing to ask and to sit with the asking and to make space for what she might want to say if she ever decides to say it. She has not said it yet. I do not know if she will. I am making room for the possibility while respecting that the room may never be used, and that respecting that is part of loving her. Update 4 months later. My mother came to stay with me for 2 weeks last month. On the 4th evening we were sitting after dinner, and she said something. Not directly, not as a confession, but as a sideways approach to something. about how she thought it was good that the world had changed, and that people could be more honest now than they had been able to be when she was young. I said I thought so too. She said she had sometimes wished things had been different when she was younger. I said I thought a lot of people felt that way. She looked at me for a moment, and then she looked at her tea, and the conversation moved on to something else. I think about that moment often. I think she was standing at a door and I was standing on the other side, and we were both aware of the door and neither of us was ready to open it yet. And that both of those things can be true simultaneously. And that simultaneously is where we are. And that I am glad we are there together rather than on opposite sides of it without knowing the other is present. Rebecca heard something she was never meant to hear. She is still deciding what to do with it. And just like Margaret had been carrying something for 30 years, the mother in story 4 had also been carrying something, but she had not kept it in her sleep. She had kept it in a storage unit for 22 years. And when her daughter finally opened that unit, she found something that told her who she actually was, not who she had been told she was, who she actually was. Let that sink in. Here is what was inside. My name is Angela. I am 36 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and 14 months ago I opened a storage unit that my mother had been paying for since before I was born, and that she had never mentioned to anyone in our family, and that I found out about only because the storage facility sent a final notice to our house address after my mother's death, and my father brought it to me not knowing what it was. My mother's name was Patricia. She had passed away at 62 from an illness that had moved faster than any of us had been prepared for. The storage unit was in a facility 10 minutes from the house I had grown up in. My mother had been paying for it for 22 years, since before I was born, since before my parents had married, since a period of her life that had existed entirely before the version of her I had known. My father did not know about the unit. He confirmed this clearly when I showed him the final notice, and he said he had never heard of this facility, and that Patricia had always handled certain accounts separately which he had respected without asking about. I went to the unit alone. I want to describe what I found in the order I found it because the order matters for understanding what happened in that unit over the next 3 hours. First, boxes of documents. Personal documents, going back to my mother's early 20s. Second, a box of baby items, clothing, a blanket, a hospital bracelet with a name on it that was not mine and a date that was 4 years before my birth. Third, a folder of legal documents that included an adoption record and a birth certificate for a child named Sophia, born 4 years before me, placed for adoption in the same city where I had grown up. Fourth, a letter, unsealed, addressed to no one, in my mother's handwriting, that said she had been 17 when Sophia was born, and that she had not been allowed to keep her, and that she had thought about her every day, and that she had kept the unit because keeping it felt like keeping a door open even if she could not walk through it, and that she was sorry she had not been brave enough to find her, and that she hoped Sophia had been loved. I sat in that storage unit for 3 hours. Then I drove home and I sat in my car in my driveway for another hour. I had a sister who was 4 years older than me, who had grown up in the same city, who might have walked past me on a street or stood behind me in a line without either of us knowing. I found Sophia through the adoption records my mother had kept. My mother had apparently been tracking the process from a distance, and had records that made the search significantly easier than it might have been. Sophia is 40 years old. She had been looking for her biological family for 6 years. We met 3 weeks after I found the unit. We look nothing alike and everything alike in a way that only people who share blood understand. Not features, but gestures, expressions, the specific way we both go quiet when we are thinking. Sophia had been loved. Her adoptive family was warm and good, and she had had a full life. She cried when I told her about the letter. She asked me to read it to her and I did, and she sat with it for a long time. And then she said she had always wondered if her mother had thought about her. I told her I could confirm she had thought about her every single day. Update: 4 months later. Sophia came to our family's holiday gathering last month. The first one since my mother's death. The first one Sophia had ever attended. She sat at a table that contained her biological family for the first time in 40 years. My father, who had not known she existed until I told him 4 months earlier, sat next to her and talked to her for most of the evening. At one point I watched him show her a photograph of my mother on his phone. My mother young, maybe 20, before any of this had existed. And I watched Sophia look at the photograph for a long time with the specific expression of someone seeing the face of a person who had thought about them every day for 40 years. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said she had her mother's eyes. My father looked at the photograph and then at Sophia and said yes. He said yes in a way that told me he was doing something very hard and doing it well, and that I was proud of him for doing it. The storage unit has been cleared. My mother's documents are in a box in my house. The baby blanket is with Sophia where it belongs. The letter is framed on her wall. She sent me a photograph of it when she hung it. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about a 17-year-old girl who had not been allowed to keep her daughter, and who had paid for a storage unit for 22 years to keep a door open. I thought the door was open now. I thought that was what my mother had wanted and that it had happened, and that it was enough and more than enough. Patricia kept a storage unit for 22 years for a daughter she could not keep. Our final story tonight, and this is the one I told you about at the very beginning, is about a mother who kept a secret. For a completely different reason. Not shame, not fear, not loss. She kept it because she was protecting someone who did not know they needed protecting. And when her daughter finally found out what her mother had done, she understood something about love that she had not understood before. This is the last story. And I promise you, it will stay with you. My name is Sarah. I am 34 years old. I live in Austin, Texas. And 8 months ago I sat down at my laptop to make what I believed was my final student loan payment. The last of $43,000 that I had been paying down over 6 years of careful budgeting and sacrifice. And discovered that my balance was not what I expected. It was zero. It had been zero for approximately 14 months. Someone had been making payments on my account. Significant payments. Not small supplementary ones, but payments that had been quietly reducing my principal in ways that I had never noticed because I had been focused on my own contributions, and had never thought to compare the rate of reduction to what my own payments should have produced. I called the loan servicer. They confirmed that my account had received multiple third-party payments over the preceding 6 years, totaling approximately $31,000. The payments had been made online, from an account I did not recognize, and had been applied to my principal specifically, not to interest, not to fees, but directly to the principal in the most efficient possible way. Which told me immediately that whoever had made them had understood how student loan repayment worked and had been strategic about it. I called my mother. My mother's name is Carol. She is 64 years old, and she has a teacher's pension and a modest savings account and has never, in my memory, had the kind of money that $31,000 over 6 years would represent as a casual expenditure. I told her what the loan servicer had told me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had not wanted me to know. I asked her how. She said that after my father had passed away 6 years earlier, She had received a life insurance payment that she had been trying to decide what to do with, and that she had decided, after several months of sitting with it, that the most useful thing she could do with it was give it to me in the way that would help me most without making me feel that I had received something I had not earned. She had understood that I would not have accepted a gift of that size directly. She had understood that I would have protested and redirected, and insisted she keep it for herself. So she had not told me. She had simply paid. For 6 years. While I had been budgeting and sacrificing and feeling proud of every payment I made, my mother had been quietly making sure that the thing I was working toward arrived sooner than it would have without her. I want to tell you what I felt when my mother told me because the feeling was complicated in a way I want to be honest about. I felt grateful. I felt overwhelmed. I felt, for a moment, that 6 years of pride in my own discipline had been partly built on something I had not known about, which produced a specific complicated feeling that took me several days to fully process. What I arrived at, on the other side of the processing, was this: my mother had not taken anything from me. She had added to something. The discipline was real. The payments I had made were real. The life I had built while making them was real. She had simply been beside me in a way I had not known about, the way she had always been beside me, and the not knowing had not changed the beside. I drove to her house, and I held her for a long time without saying much. She said she was sorry if she had overstepped. I told her she had not overstepped. I told her she had done the thing she had always done, which was love me in the most practical and specific way available to her, and that I was sorry it had taken me 6 years to know it, and that I was grateful and that gratitude did not begin to cover it. She said it covered it just fine. Update 4 months later. My mother's birthday was last month. I had been thinking for months about what to do, and what I came up with was this. I opened a savings account in her name, and made an initial deposit, and set up a monthly automatic contribution. And I told her what I had done, and that the account was hers, and that the contributions would continue for as long as I was able to make them. She said she did not need it. I said I knew. She said she had not done what she did to be repaid. I said I knew that too, and that this was not repayment. This was me doing the thing she had taught me, loving someone in the most practical and specific way available. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that was a very good way to put it. I said I had learned it from her. We had birthday dinner. She ordered dessert, which she usually does not. I took it as a sign that something had settled between us that needed settling, and that the dessert was the specific form that settled things take when they arrive. I had 2 bites of hers. She let me. I think that is what love looks like when it has been going long enough to not need words anymore.